like to do a bit of a step-by-step as to how I integrated this background or integrated this character into this 3D background. Well, how I did the 3D, we can talk about that some other day. But here is, once I have the 3D, how I made it feel more unified. I had this character. I knew I wanted like a very chromy, shiny, mirrory background. So I went in 3D and I did a very chromy, shiny, mirrory background. And it looks like this. I exported like 2 passes. One of them is just clean, and one of them has like a dummy in there to get some of the material information. You can see how that creates just more accurate reflections in all of the materials, right? And in the final, I use this background for everything but the mirrors, essentially. Then I painted these reflections. What was really important here is I had the 3Ds to kind of imply what perspective am I seeing these reflections in the mirror from, right? So it was just kind of like drawing over those. And then we get here. And then something you'll see is one of the big issues you have when you're trying to integrate 2D and 3D is there's very easily a whole lot of information in 3D. A whole lot of information. It's very complex and dense. And the 2D I had painted wasn't as complex and dense. So this was a problem I had to solve. And what I did is I did another render of these spines here with an almost empty environment. Essentially, I hid almost everything in the Blender scene and just rendered out my spines here with the HDRI that I was using with the environment. And so that removes a lot of the density of information in all these spines. That's an important step. Did these frames here. That's just like a design thing. I wanted the space to have frames around the mirrors. This looks very dramatic and complex. And if you were to see this scene in real life, I would actually imagine that it would look a little bit more like this and just be this busy all over the place. But since it's an illustration, I wanted to separate the character from the background, right? And in this case, I did it with a series of passes of like levels adjustments where I just boosted all the high values in the scene, and a series of just like layers of white put over the background. I implied that the light source behind her is really bright, so I add this very bright highlight on the immediate surroundings of that very bright light. And now we're kind of getting there, right? We're kind of getting to a point where the image could have very easily looked like this, and I kind of like this too. But if we want to really separate the character, which I did want to do, you can just do that with like a series of lightening passes. And then to sort of bring the character and the 3D environment together, something you can sometimes do is put an adjustment layer over the character and the 3D environment. And so in this case, you know how mirrors, if you reflect mirrors a million times into each other, they're actually kind of green. I used that to pick the adjustment that I then wanted to overlay the entire composition with. Now it feels more integrated. It feels more like it's in the same space. But now I lose a little bit of the separation. So I go back in after having sort of unified the entire composition with these passes of green over top. I come back in and and undo some of that work. Go back to that more sterile white and black look. But you can still see I keep a little bit of that green tint just to make it feel like everything has been treated with some of the same light information. Add the reflection down here and the piece is done. So the big takeaways are, when you're dealing with 3D or photo information, you want to integrate like a simpler 2D character with that. Try to somehow reduce the information in the 3D because it gets really dense, and do some very, very subtle overlays where you're affecting the entire thing in the same way. This can be like a 2% multiply layer or something. You just hitting all of the scene with a little bit of like the same treatment, a little bit of like the same light. And then of course it really helps if you can do stuff like this where you're actually painting 2D into the 3D. Just really ties things together. Cool.